You're listening to the Productive Muslim Podcast, Season 1, Episode 6.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Productive Muslim Podcast, the weekly podcast where we help you live a productive lifestyle so that you can be successful in this life and the hereafter.
Assalamu alaikum, productive Muslims. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Mifra Marif, and today I have another interview with a productive Muslim. Now, if you're new to these interviews, then these are ones in which we speak to exemplary individuals from all walks of life. We get an insight into their productivity and takeaway lessons we can implement. And joining me on the show today, our guest is Dr. Meraj Mohiuddin. Now, he's a Harvard-trained physician with a background in neuroscience. He's a writer and a father living in Phoenix, Arizona. He's the author of Revelation, which is one-of-a-kind textbook on the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the story of the Quranic revelation in the English language. Now, this book has won the award for the Best International Non-Fiction Award at the 2016 Sharjah International Book Fair, which is one of the largest book fairs in the world, and has been used as the textbook for many schools. So not only is this book remarkable, but the story of Dr. Meraj, who wrote the book over a period of 13 years whilst having a family and a demanding career. So there are a lot of insights to be taken away from this episode. So let's get started with our interview.
Is pornography a problem in your life? Is it a problem in your marriage? It doesn't have to be. You can beat it. Join Brother Wayne Ibrahim for his new and exclusive Beat It course. Head over to productivemuslimacademy.com for more information.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Meraj. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Mifra. I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you for joining us on the show. We're excited to have you on. So first of all, can we just start off with an introduction, a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So my full name is Meraj Mohiuddin. I am currently speaking to you from Phoenix, Arizona, where I live. I have my parents are from Indian background, and I grew up in the States, in the East Coast, and went to college and medical school. I'm currently a practicing physician and anesthesiologist here in the southwest of the country. And my hobbies are just spending time with my family, reading, and playing sports, basically.
Fantastic. So you are the one who wrote the book, which was called The Revelation, and it's been described as a one-of-a-kind textbook in the English language on the biography of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So I want to know, especially on behalf of us who've never heard about this book, what is it that makes it unique and different to a normal book on the seerah?
So I think what I have tried to do is there are a number of features that I think make it unique, but essentially my goal in writing this book was I just felt that I was so used to studying medicine and science in a way that gave me information through multiple mediums. So I had, not just text, but I had, notes and charts and glossaries and appendices and, visual aids and, study aids and so forth. And I was struggling to really master the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a way that stuck with me and I could hold on to the way I held on to, topics like microbiology or chemistry and so forth. So basically what I set out to do for myself is just come up with a personal study guide for the book. And over a period of 13 years, what I ended up with is a textbook, which I would kind of consider a meta-analysis of multiple sources. So if you take a bookshelf of some of the most commonly read texts in the English language, I've taken many of those, about 10 different sources, first sources, a lot of other secondary sources, and just compressed it into one book. So I think the first thing that makes it a little bit unique, and the thing that I think it's speaking to a lot of people, especially nowadays where people feel so strapped for time and with busy lives and work and internet and everything else and the distractions of modern life, I think one of the things that makes this book unique for a lot of people is that they feel that when they read this book, they're actually getting an entire bookshelf compressed into one book so that they don't have to go and chase down other sources of information. I kind of bring the best of all of these books into one book and just present the information in a way that makes sense.
So this book actually took you around 13 years to make, and putting that into perspective, 13 years is roughly the time it takes to go through school. And so that's quite a long time. So I'm curious to know, like, how did you stay focused throughout all those years? Like, how did you stay focused throughout all those years? Yeah, not just like give up and say, you know what, I'm going to give up on this whole Thera thing.
Well, let me backtrack a little bit and tell you, it did take me 13 years. I started writing this book in 2003. It wasn't, to be clear to the listeners, it wasn't like 13 years where I was kind of locked in a room and just wrote this book. It was 13 years while I was living life. I was finishing medical school. I went through a very challenging residency in Boston. I was also teaching at Harvard at the time. So it was a very, I was in a relationship and so forth. So it was, it was 13 non-linear years of progression. And I never had any intention of actually publishing a book until about 8 years into the project. So for the first 8 years, it was just like, I'm writing this for myself.
Oh, really?
We died. Maybe I'll share this with my family. It was really in about year 7 and 8 where I realized I actually have something here that doesn't exist in the world. And maybe if I just give it the extra push, I can actually, have something that I can share with my family, friends, and if it's good enough, maybe share with my local community. I was never imagining of sharing it with the international community at that point.
All right.
So
yeah.
So focus. I mean, I think that's a great question, and the truth is that I've had focus, and I've also lost focus at times. The fact of the matter is, and this is kind of the key to the story here, is that the ability to focus and stay committed to this, you need a coach. We all need a coach to kind of achieve certain things that we're trying to do. And my coach, when it came to focusing and persevering with this process, was actually the topic that I was writing about himself, because no one was more focused and had more perseverance and had more challenges than the Prophet ﷺ and the companions who were around him. So it becomes a lot easier to focus and persevere on a book when the actual material you're writing about is predominantly about perseverance in the face of adversity, and perseverance in the face of even success. So there were many times where I said, you know what, this is exhausting. Why am I doing this? I have other things to do.
Yeah.
I'm on call tomorrow. I don't have a life anymore. All I do is I work 2 full-time jobs. And so there are a lot of times where these voices crept into my head, and I'm sure they creep into everyone's head. With whatever you're doing. However, regardless of however noble you're doing what you're doing is, there are times where you're just like, you know what, this isn't paying off. It's not turning out the way I wanted it to turn out. Maybe, and then you have all these negative feelings. Maybe I'm not the person to do this. What was I thinking? Who do I think I am to do this? There's so many people who are better than me, and why am I stepping up to the mic? And you have these are like whisperings that come to your voice. And ultimately, that's when it comes down to, do you actually love what you're doing? Because that's what separates the people who are doing it because they feel like they should do it, and the people who actually do it out of a love for what they're doing. The people who do it, when they do it, they start listening to those voices, and it totally starts pulling them away from their mission. The people who love what they're doing, they will do things till the end, regardless of whether they feel like it's paying off, regardless of whether anyone's listening, regardless of whether they think it's worth a sacrifice or not, because they just derive so much enjoyment, and they're intrinsically motivated by the purpose of what they're doing and not the profits that are going to come out of what they do. I think ultimately that's what leads most people to kind of persevere in this regard. And you can look in the seerah itself, in the life of the Prophet himself, and you'll see that's what drove these people to be so incredibly successful. And for example, the Meccan period, it was 13 years. So it's like 13 years of this book to write it. The Meccan period was 13 years. What drove these people to go through hardship, to travel to Abyssinia, to come back, to go suffer 3 years of the ban, to be abused and some of them martyred in Mecca? It was out of love and commitment that was just unwavering. And so I think if you have that kind of intrinsic motivation, as opposed to what do I get out of this, it's incredible what human beings can do.
Unwavering perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
So, you just mentioned how throughout your journey of writing this book, your coach was the actual topic that you were researching. So can a book have that much effect on you? Like just reading, yeah?
Meaning this book that I wrote, you're saying?
No, I just mean, like, you see how people say take role models, as in you can take role models from people who are living and they have a good influence on you, or you can read something about someone in the past and that can also have a good influence on you. But does that really work?
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on, again, like any book you do or anything you do in life. And like I said, when it comes to my book, a lot of it just depends on what you're going to put into this. What's the intention that you approach, a biography on anybody? Some people read a biography to be entertained some people actually will read a biography. For example, people read biographies on the Prophet Islam to find holes and points of weakness that they can, make fun of the Prophet Islam. And so they'll find what they need because it depends on what they're looking for.
That's true.
If you look at this book or any book, and this is why reading is so powerful, is because if you go in with the intention of how is spending time with this book or spending time with this movie, how can I walk away from it slightly different than I walked into it? And you have that mindset of how can I improve? Even if you're reading a book on stuff you don't agree with necessarily, it can be changed. And so, when you're walking into things for entertainment value, you're kind of like turning off the part of your brain, which is like, how can I become a better person because of this experience I'm about to go into? And so I think, books, certainly, unfortunately, books are becoming less and less popular in today's day and age. They're probably still the most powerful medium because you have to sit down, shut everything else out, and spend time alongside the author and just go through their world. And I think the people who love reading, this is why they do it, is because it's like traveling. They go and they come out in a different destination and they're slightly different than they were before they entered that journey.
That's true. I just finished reading a book today myself and I was just really affected by it, like as in it. I felt like I was taken through a journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to get more into like the nitty gritty of what it took for you to write this book. I mean, you had to balance between your family, your work, and other commitments, and I'm sure it wasn't like a walk in the park. So can you tell us a bit about it?
Sure. So I think the first thing I'll say is that, and I've been told in the past that I've emphasize this, so I don't want to do that again here. I will tell people it took an incredible amount of just hours of work. And, we tend to, after we do a big project, human beings generally tend to forget all the oomph that they put into an effort. And I might be victim to that too. But the truth is, it took so many hours that I didn't even keep track of how many hours it was taking. This was something where I would have my laptop with me, even if I was waiting to pick someone up from the airport and I knew I'd have to wait in the cell phone parking lot for 45 minutes, I would take the laptop with me. So I knew that was time I could be editing or writing or compiling. So that's kind of the obsession I had with the book. I would, if I was, in the hospital and between cases or something, I knew I had an hour break, I'd be working on my book. Yeah, if I would come home. I'll give you a classic example. As an anesthesiologist, doing trauma cases, I usually spend the night, working all night with, emergency trauma cases that come in. And usually as anesthesiologists, we work for about 24 hours and then we have the next 24 hours off. And we use those 24 hours off like pilots to rest and recuperate and so forth. And most people just kind of hang out, sleep, and just kind of recover for their next shift that's coming up the day after. I always looked at every time I was on call, I always looked at that day after call as my work day to really power through the book. So it was a period of not much rest and constantly trying to squeeze every free minute and hour of my day that I wasn't giving towards my primary job as physician or to my family, into how can I get more work done? How can I get more work done? I'm getting closer to the finish line. How can I get more work done? A lot of that for me, the way I did that is I took this goal, and just broke it down to very manageable sub goals. And I would just say, okay, by Friday, my goal is to get through this book or get through this many chapters or review this many things. And I'll just keep myself accountable every day. So if I missed a day, the next day I'd have to put in twice as much work because I knew I wouldn't make my goal if I didn't break it down these sub goals and put specific deadlines on this. And I think that's kind of one of the things I learned early on. And, everyone has their own methodology. My methodology is very deadline oriented. So if I don't put deadlines on things, for example, if I don't, lose 5 pounds by this date or by this event, you know what I mean? It's not going to happen. Or if I don't, edit or write this many pages, or if I don't go through 2 books by the end of the month, it's probably not going to happen. So I'm kind of deadline oriented in that way. And that's the way it kind of keeps me on track and makes sure that I can achieve bigger goals by making sure that I achieve the smaller goals along the way.
But what happens if you break a deadline?
Oh, well, that happens all the time. Of course, you break deadlines and so forth. And that's okay. That's the whole process, is that you're going to break deadlines. And the purpose of the deadline is to give you something to work towards. And a lot of times, I've been told by the people who work around me, sometimes my deadlines to them are fairly unrealistic. But I like to I think they're realistic. They just require an extraordinary amount of effort, but I like to put those deadlines in place. But the key is not to get frustrated. I mean, it's important to have realistic deadlines. If you keep missing every deadline because you're over exaggerating your work effort, you're just going to feel like, like a procrastinator, or worse yet, you're going to feel like a loser. Yeah. And you certainly don't want to beat yourself up over having those kinds of deadlines. But at the same time, again, here's the thing, is that if the goal is valuable to you and you believe in what you're trying to achieve, those setbacks of not accomplishing your deadline are not going to really ruffle you too much. Yeah. If that makes sense. If the goal is really to fall in love with the Prophet of Islam or help share this with the world, I'll give you a classic example. Yeah. Okay. I published this book in 2015.
All right.
Okay. I thought in 2010 I was going to publish the book in 2012.
Yeah.
So how about that for a deadline? That's a 4-year overshoot on what my deadline was. But it was totally worth it. And the reason why it took me 4 years is because I wrote the book 4 times over again. I wrote the book, I was ready for it to be published, and then I took it to my editors. We went back to it and I said, this can be better. And I added some more interesting materials. I added the glossary. Second edition, did it again. And I looked at it and said, you know what? There are better figures in this. I know we can do better. Third edition, you know what? We haven't put enough Quran in there to really set off the book. Fourth edition. So that's just the nature of it. But at the end of the day, I was more committed to the end result than getting it done by a certain time, because the end result was much more important to me than just a date and a time.
That's true. Yeah, because the thing about deadlines that I think of is like, there's a difference between when a deadline is assigned to you by somebody else, because that has consequences. But when you give yourself a deadline, there isn't much, you can say, consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very self-directed. But I see what you mean by making sure that you are committed to doing that goal, because that way, even if you do fall on a deadline, you'll still keep pushing forward.
Absolutely. And, one thing I'll just mention while you're talking this came to my mind is that one of the powers of making a statement and saying, I'm going to be this person, or I'm going to finish this by this date, and then achieving that goal is not only do you stay on track, but I think even more powerfully, you start developing confidence in your integrity, to stay true to your convictions and your ability to stay disciplined to what you're trying to do. So like they say, there's a famous phrase that says, success breeds success. And I believe that personally also, if you're successful with your personal goals, you start being able to achieve more, because all you have to do is just say, this is who I'm going to be on this date. And if you have a good track record of following through on your goals, it creates a whole world of possibility of trying to become the person that you want to be, that you never dreamed possible, because you have the integrity to stick by your word, to follow through on what you said you were going to do. And you end up start going places in terms of your own human development, or in terms of your own human productivity, which you never dreamed possible before. You can link it to, a very simple example is you can link it to prayer, right? So a lot of people, it's challenging to pray 5 times a day in the modern world, and certainly in the Western world, where you don't necessarily have a mosque around every corner.
Yeah.
I'm sure readers can relate to this. Once you miss the morning prayer, all of a sudden it kind of changes your routine. You just don't feel,
Yeah,
you
it
feel
does.
like, you feel right. So you miss Fajr, and then all of a sudden you just feel like, Dhuhr, my track record's already busted. My day's kind of colored already. So Dhuhr's coming in, and you don't feel as on top of your game. You feel like you're defeated, and you've only woken up, right? And so, as just as a basic example, that when you nail the first prayer, you're excited about nailing the second prayer because you nailed the hardest one. So now why can't you nail the second one? It's easy, right? And once you nail two, also there's a piece of cake. By the time you hit three, Maghrib, you're looking forward to it, and by the time you hit 4 and 5, you're like, this is a great day. I've nailed everything I can do. And guess what? Tomorrow morning it's going to be even easier. And so that same mentality of success breeds success. I think not only is it, you can say that with prayer and prayer times, but also with just the most micro and macro goals that people set for themselves.
So with this book, you actually visualize yourself. You really believe that you were going to get this done regardless.
I believed I was going to do everything I could to get it done. I didn't know if it would get done, ultimately. That's not in my hands, but I believed in my heart I was going to do everything. There came a point, I would say in 2010, where I had a vision of what this book could possibly be. And at that point, I had decided myself that I'm going to do everything within my capacity, be it time, be it financially, be it materially, be it with relationships, be it with sacrificing time. I was going to do everything within my power to make this happen, and just, leave the rest up to Allah to see whether it actually happened or not.
Yeah. So what I also find remarkable about this book is that the one that wrote it, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have any formal training in Islamic sciences. So your
Correct.
background is in medicine, and you're able to produce such peace. And so I was wondering, did you ever feel at any point that you thought that you shouldn't be the one writing this book?
Did I ever not feel that way is a better question. Along the way, and that's why, again, for the first 7 to 8 years, it never even entered my mind that I should or I would write something that other people would read. Again, because that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I think other doctors can relate to this. As a doctor, I kind of don't feel the need to read things written by other doctors on non-medical topics, because a lot of times people think that doctors have a sense of, they know everything and they can do anything they want and so forth. And so I can sense that myself, even admittedly as a doctor. I don't know that I want to read another book on anything other than medicine by a doctor. So that's definitely playing in the back of my mind. And which is why, I never told anyone about this project all the time I was writing it. It was only in the last 2 years or so that even my closest friends found out I was writing this book, because it just was something close to my heart. I didn't want people to know about it. I was a little gun shy about what I was up to and so forth. I think what changed for me was a couple of things. First of all, I was starting to get input. What I did is I sent my book out and early editions out to a number of scholars who I really respect a lot. And I said to myself, look, I will never put anything out on such an important topic unless I make sure it's vetted by scholars who not only I trust, but the Muslim community trusts at large.
Yeah.
And so that's why I sent, copies of the book to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Imam Zaid Shakir, to Dr. Sherman Jackson, to Dr. Omar Abdullah Farouk, to people who really are kind of to me and my impression are the people who I trust. And, to make sure, I don't have any ijaza to teach Sirah and so forth. And so I said, look, I want to make sure that this fits the bill according to their standards. And only then, when I started to hear back from them and to get the feedback to adjust the book to a way that they felt was suitable, and also to get the support and kind of the slap on the back that said, this is powerful. No one has done this before. You need to move forward with this. But I actually feel like, okay, I've gotten the support and the green light from the people I trust and respect. I've done everything I can to kind of, keep my intentions pure about this. I'm going to, as Dr. Sherman Jackson said, just put your faith in Allah and just let Allah do his thing. And so that was challenging for me, but, I'll admit that. But the second aspect to this, and this is a very critical point, I think, and if people are listening to this is the part that I think speaks to me the most, and I hope it speaks to you, is that the companions of the Prophet, ﷺ, they were not all scholars. Some of them were just busy shepherds, or they carried water buckets, or they were farmers, or they were, in agriculture market. They were busy, and they had families and lives. Okay, but here's the thing: what they all had in common is they had an intense and profound commitment to the Prophet, Islam. And when it comes to, like, I would never dream of, at least at this point in my life with where I'm at right now, I would never put out a book on, law and fiqh and so forth, because that requires a certain amount of intellectual rigor and scholarship to go there. But what I want to challenge the world and Muslims and non-Muslims with is that you don't need any prerequisite to know the Prophet, Islam. You don't need any prerequisite to fall in love with him. You don't need to know Arabic grammar or morphology. You don't need to know, the finer details of Islamic jurisprudence and so forth to fall in love with the Prophet, Islam. What you need is a beating heart. And people should not feel, regardless of, whoever's listening right now, if you're a busy mom with 3 kids and you have to change diapers, while you're listening to this podcast, or if you're an engineering student who's studying for a thermodynamics exam, or if you're, a retiree living in South Africa, whoever it is, you should never at any point feel that, oh, I don't know enough to have the closest connection to the Prophet Islam, or that scholar, because he's memorized the Quran, he'll be closer to the Prophet Islam than I can. And that really needs to be, that mentality needs to be adjusted, because my understanding, some of the very closest companions to the Prophet Islam, they all weren't masters of the tradition necessarily. And that's not to belittle them in any way. In today's day and age, they would all be masters of the tradition compared to where our community is right now. So to put it into relative context, but the people who had some of the closest connections to the Prophet Islam were people who had embraced Islam within 24-hour period of time. And it was their heart that brought them close to the Prophet based on their knowledge of the Prophet Islam and his heart that made them so close. And this is absolutely the case with a connection to the Prophet. It's absolutely a case with a connection, most importantly, to Allah, is that it's really your heart that brings you close. And so don't feel anyone out there, and including myself, I tell this all the time, I don't have to be a scholar to be connected to the Prophet. I certainly should be a scholar if I'm going to express things on fiqh and stuff like that. But when it comes to building a connection with the Prophet, peace be upon him, that's for everybody to have. And anybody can be the most connected person, and everybody can be the most connected person.
It sounds like your journey on actually creating this book and putting it together really reminds me of the Meccan time of the Prophet ﷺ, how it started off with his family, close supporters, and then went out to the world.
Absolutely.
In the same way you started with just telling your family about it and then getting some support from people who you trusted, and then after that you went out with it. Absolutely. I mean, again, and this is, and I think that's an interesting point you make. This is my coach. This is the very best. People say, people use the word, when they talk about the Prophet, they'll say, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, and they'll say, Habibina or Maulana and so forth. And so it's hard to kind of translate those terms into English when you say, my love or my liege lord or so forth. But, I always kind of, to simplify it, I always refer to the Prophet of Islam as my coach, because I've had coaches in my life. I haven't had Habibs in my life. So it's hard for me to kind of relate to that vernacular. So I've had coaches in my life. And what coaches do is, the very best coaches, they want you to win the game, but more importantly, they want you to become the best version of yourself that you can be. When I look at Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a coach, I feel that he's constantly patting me on the back and saying, you're better than this. You can do better. I believe in you. I'll never give up on you. Get back in the game. Give it another shot. He's never going to sideline me and tell me I'm not good enough for the team and so forth. He's always rooting for me. It's like he was always rooting for his companions. And so when we go back to this concept of kind of pushing forward and following this example, of like how organically this is kind of coming to the world, I don't think it's unusual that maybe it's following that same organic pattern that the coach followed, because I'm just trying to follow the coach's example. I mean, certainly what you see in the Meccan period, you're going to face adversity, you're going to face criticism. And some of that I'm not saying that, clearly this is not, it's kind of, it's an okay metaphor, but clearly I have, this mission that I'm on is clearly going to have some human flaws and errors in it, and it certainly can be improved. And so we'll have valid criticisms, but there's going to be, I'm ready for there to be, just kind of harsh criticism or
or people with malintention and so forth. And that's part of the journey and part of the coaching plan too. And my coach, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the revelation itself, gives us guidance on how to deal with that part of a movement also. So
yeah. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to ask you as well, so many people want to leave behind a legacy or like make a difference and make something out of their life. And how would you go about with finding your own way to do so? Finding your own thing, you can say?
Yeah, finding your own thing. That's a good question. And that's a question I get asked a lot when I speak in person to audiences, is that people come up to me and they say, you know what, I'm really inspired by this, or I've been inspired by some other story, and I've been struggling to figure out like what my thing is. Like, I got the energy, but I'm really frustrated because I just don't know what my thing is. And I think it's a very valid question. I think there are a couple things that you can do to kind of figure out what your thing is. The first, I guess, piece of advice I would give is that you really have to try a lot of different things. A lot of us, we grow up, for example, and our second grade teacher told us we're really good at math. And so because of that second grade teacher a long time ago who told us we were good in math, we just automatically say, oh, I'm a scientist. I'm not a creative person. You see what I'm saying? Like, the vast majority of our parents say, oh, my third child is very brighter than the other two, and she's going to be an incredible writer. Now that child's going to bring up, and it's great that her parents supported that way, but she'll say, oh, I'm a creative type, I'm not a scientist type. Or people go up with these ideas of like, I've been told I'm left-brained, so I'm just going to stick to left-brain stuff. I'm not going to do right-brain stuff, or vice versa. And I think that's a very dangerous thing. It's great to promote your children or promote people around you and so forth, but I think you ultimately have to figure out what sticks for you, and not let a second grade teacher from 25 years ago dictate who you're going to be at age 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. And I think part of the journey of humans in general is to really just try a lot of things, and don't be scared to experience new experiences. So like we talked about earlier, go read a book and see, maybe there's something in this that's going to stick to me and tell me more about myself that I didn't know about myself before. Or maybe I'm going to go play tennis, even though my whole life I thought I was clumsy, or people told me I'm clumsy, and I'm going to try this and maybe consider maybe I'm not that clumsy. So I think, step one is just to go try things, and don't limit yourself to what people tell you should or shouldn't do. I'll give you a classic example. Like, I would never consider myself a writer. I didn't really care for reading and writing as a kid, and even through high school and college, I took all math science classes. I didn't take any writing classes in college formally. Or maybe I took one as a requirement, but that was it. Because actually in my family, my brother's a writer. So he was always literary type, and I was always this kind of the sports kind of techie type. So I didn't do it. And so I could have gone through my whole life not writing. But, one day, actually my brother, he actually bought me a Kindle, and I was on Kindle, and I realized that I'm actually a voracious reader. And I never knew that. My whole life I never read. And then that suddenly, randomly at the age of 27, I just can't stop reading. So again, you just kind of have to just try on new hats, because you never know what sticks. And if you don't try on those hats, you'll never really know what you're good at. Because ultimately, if you're not good at what you're trying to do, or you're not passionate about it, you're going to get crushed by the competition. And so, that's what I tell people, is you really have to figure out, what are you really good at? What really comes naturally to you? And usually those things are the things you end up enjoying. And once you find that, you got to figure out a way of how do you take that passion and do it into something that's actually meaningful and productive. A story from my life that, if I had the time, I'd tell people when they come to me and ask me for advice on, I want to do this, or I don't know what to do, and so forth, is in my own life, I was training for an Ironman triathlon. I've done Ironman triathlons in the past, and I was training for an Ironman triathlon, which is like a 140-mile endurance race. And I was getting really into this stuff, and training a lot for like hours at a time, or go for like a 6-hour bike ride, or a 3-hour run, or like a 2-hour swim, and so forth. And it was just very committed to this kind of like physical exertion. And it was kind of a period of my life. And my goal in all this was just, this is fun, and I want to see how far I can push my body and how much I can achieve. And it definitely shaped me a lot into the person I am today in terms of goal setting and so forth. But what happened is I realized as I was training more and more for it, it was naturally coming at a cost of other things. If I spend 6 hours riding a bike, that's 6 hours that I'm not studying or reading, or 6 hours I'm spending away from my family. And as you evolve through life, your goals naturally should change because your circumstances change. And so, one day I actually got an email from someone. It was a random email, and it was actually it happened to be from another triathlete, and he had a signature at the bottom of his email. And people normally have like inspiring quotes, from the bottom of the email that no one reads. Well, for whatever reason, I read this quote, and it had a profound effect on my life. And that quote was, and I'll tell you the quote right now. The quote was, "Our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding at things that don't really matter."
Wow.
So I'll read that again. I said, "Our greatest fear should not be of failure, but of succeeding at things that don't really matter." And that had a profound effect on me, because I said, look, I'm spending all of these hours training for this race. I've already done it before. Now I'm doing it again. And in doing it, the opportunity cost is I might not be spending enough time with my child or with my wife or with my family, or learning more about my deen, or resting and relaxing. And it's coming at a cost. And is the goal really worth it right now? And when you start looking at what you're trying to do in life and start assessing, why am I doing this? Does this really matter? Because if you pour your life into something that doesn't really matter, it's a tragedy, because you could have put into something that really helped other people. And that's the point. After I read that quote and a bunch of other things I read, for example, there's like one of my favorite quotes is by a scholar by the name of Ibn Jawzi, who said, "If you want to know your value with your Lord, look at how he is using you and what actions he has kept you busy with."
Yeah, that is quite profound.
So I'll read it again. If you want to know your value with your Lord, look to how he is using you and what actions he has kept you busy with. So that made me realize, these two quotes together made me realize, my goal is to, my Creator created me with certain skill sets, just like he created you with certain skill sets, and just like he created every reader, every listener out there with certain skill sets. Some of us are hammers, some of us are screwdrivers, some of us are levers, some of us are drills. Okay. The goal is to figure out what innate skills the Creator has created us with. And once you figure out what that skill is, you got to take it to the max. This is kind of something that, Malcolm X's mother, Betty Shabazz, said. He says, your goal in life, I'm paraphrasing here, is to figure out, what your goal in life is. And when you figure that out, you got to take it to the max. So if I'm a hammer, I need to start banging in every nail I can and stop wasting time with screwdrivers, because I can't bang in a screw. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? And if you're a screwdriver, use that screwdriver to turn screws into the wood, because you're doing something that I can't do. And you should spend your life trying to get as many screws in, because that's why God created you. He created you with these specific skill sets, and your job is to take those skill sets to the max. And that's what you see with the companions also. The companions are so different. So many of them had overlapping skill sets, and many of them had skill sets that never overlapped with other people. And the Prophet ﷺ was very keen as a coach of helping people recognize what they're best at, developing those skill sets to their maximum capability, and then letting the companions go and not just necessarily stay in Medina, but spread out around the world and share those skills. So what's an example of that? And so that's what, in
terms of a companion and their skill set.
A classic example is Mus'ab bin Umair. Okay, so Mus'ab is, I'll give you two examples. Mus'ab bin Umair was sent, the Prophet could have picked many people to go to Yathrib, which was Medina before it was named Medina, to go and prep for the Prophet ﷺ's arrival. Okay, he could have sent. I mean, why wouldn't he have sent Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, who has been with the Prophet ﷺ probably longer than anyone else, especially during the pre-prophethood period? But Mus'ab is very specific in that Mus'ab, he had an ability to introduce the message in a way to people that the Prophet ﷺ recognized, and that's the reason why he sent Mus'ab there. And because of Mus'ab's skill set, the hijrah was successful for the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, classic example. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, one of his classic strengths was in genealogies. He knew family trees better than anyone else. He really knew why people were the way they were because of their father did this to so-and-so's cousin and this and that. He knew. Why do you think the Prophet ﷺ used to visit Abu Bakr radiallahu anh on a daily basis? I'm not saying it specifically for this reason, but why did he keep him such a close companion and a close advisor? Is because Abu Bakr radiallahu anh understood people really well. He understood why people interacted based on who they were and what their pedigree was. Another classic example is, companions in the later period. I believe, and I'll have to check this, I believe it was Safwan ibn Umayyah, who had recently converted to Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ sent him to negotiate with a northern tribe in Arabia because Safwan had connections with that tribe, even though he had just entered Islam just a few months ago or a few weeks ago, and their companions had been alongside the Prophet for over 20 years. A fourth example is Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. The Prophet ﷺ chose him specifically to go to Abyssinia. Now, he could have chosen a lot of people, but Ja'far ibn Abi Talib was incredibly eloquent. The Prophet said, no one appeared more like the Prophet than Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. He looked so much like the Prophet in his physical attributes and in the way he was and so forth. There's a reason why the Prophet chose. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but there's a reason why he chose people and groomed them to maximize their capacity. Like Abu Hurairah, for example. Radiallahu anh. He was one of the people of the bench. His capacity wasn't in storing information and mastering the text, which is why, he is one of the leading, source of like hadith literature that we have. So in all of this, and in many women, I could go on and on about the Prophet's wives, like Sauda and Maymuna and Aisha and Hafsa and so forth, radiallahu anha. But, he identified their strength. He encouraged their strength. He also helped them train their weaknesses, and he sent them out in the world to go do what they were created
That's true. So it's a mix of skill set, experiences they've had, and advantages that they have over other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're actually nearing out the end of our interview, and so I want to ask you, where can our audience find you online and get your book?
So the easiest way to get in touch with us is if you go to our website. It's www.revelationthebook.com. So www.revelationthebook.com. If you go to that website, you'll get all the information about the book. You can take a look inside the book. You can get a sense of who are the people who are endorsing the book. You can get all the statistics about what's in the book and so forth. Then you can also contact us. So you can contact our team. If you need to contact me personally, you can contact us. You can, there's a contact email there. And you can say, and for a number of reasons, to give us your support, to ask questions, to make orders of the book, to tell us how we can make the book better. We're open to, the world in terms of helping make this a phenomenon that is powerful for the world. So that's the easiest way. We're also on Facebook. If you search for Revelation and Instagram and so forth.
Fantastic. And finally, this is something that we ask all our guests. How would you define a productive Muslim?
That's a great question. I'll tell you this. I wouldn't define a productive Muslim necessarily based on what their outcomes show, because a lot of productivity isn't apparent to other people. But a productive Muslim, the easiest answer and probably the most honest answer is a productive Muslim is the Muslim who most closely follows the Sunnah of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, the period of Quranic revelation occurred over 23 years. The period of transformation of an entire society, one individual at a time, occurred over 23 years. That kind of accomplishment, whether you want to talk about strategically, politically, spiritually, literary, in terms of the Quran being revealed and so forth, has never been achieved in a 23-year period in any other time in human history. I don't think you could even say it's been achieved in a 100-year period of any time in human history. So if you want to talk about a productive Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ is the ultimate productive Muslim. And so if he is the one who walked the walk, certainly following his example is going to lead people to kind of be productive. So now you can break that down to a lot of specific habits. Some of the ones that I would say are the most important in terms of being productive are people who really watch their time closely. So, a productive Muslim is someone who's going to be looking at the clock and breaking up their day into pieces of time and saying, okay, this is the period of time where I need to wake up and focus on my spirituality. This is the period of time where I need to kind of go be with my family. This is the period of time where I need to dedicate myself to getting the job done that I'm trying to do. This is the period of time that I'm going to, try to connect with Allah. This is the period of time where I'm going to rest and just hang out and relax and just be a family man or be a friend to people. And if you look at the Prophet of Islam, productive Muslims, I think, are people, who are constantly aware of their time management and constantly auditing and managing their time and tweaking their time to make sure that they're trying to follow the Sunnah as closely as possible. And in doing so, what they're doing is they're giving their rights to everyone around them in their appropriate due, and not shortchanging themselves from the rights that their body has over them, rights that Allah has over them, rights that their wife has over them, rights that their children have over them. So in that way, I mean that sincerely with my heart, is the people who are the most productive, it's not what they accomplish necessarily, because there's incredible accomplishments of people that are sitting in a room that you will never see, because those are accomplishments that's probably between that person and their creator, or that's an accomplishment between that person and their spouse. So for example, a mother who is raising 3 kids, she might not have time to write a book, but she's raising 3 kids. Now people might look at that and say, oh, well, what do you do? A mom, for example, might say, you know what, I want to do this. And I had dreams of, starting a career in art or starting a career in XYZ, but I have 3 kids. And so while listening to this podcast, it's great that you were able to write a book, but I don't think I'll have the time to do that. And what I'm here to tell you is that if you follow the Sunnah, the family is the most important thing. And you raising those 3 children is probably the most productive thing that you could do with your time. And the productivity of those 3 children will also, later in their lives, will testify to what you did for those children. So it's very important to keep things in perspective, to understand that productivity isn't necessarily a metric that you can apply to everybody and to say, oh, you're being productive or you're not being productive. It's really something that you know yourself internally, and only you can audit between you and Allah.
That's true. Dr. Meraj, Jazakallah khair for joining us on the show. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, I'm honored to be here. I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing. Productive Muslim is a very powerful platform. I'm good friends with Muhammad Faris, who has started this incredible initiative. And I'm going to plug his book, by the way, if I can, because Muhammad and I met, and he actually signed a copy of the book for me. And his book is incredibly powerful because he speaks very much in much more detail and much more systematically than what I've covered today about how to be a productive Muslim. And what I love about his book is he's very attached to the Prophet ﷺ, and he stresses the importance of following his daily plan and monthly plan and yearly plan if you're trying to achieve the goals and try to have a life that mirrors the life of the most productive Muslim, which is the Prophet ﷺ. So little shameless plug there for his book also.
All right, so that wraps up our interview with our guest, Dr. Meraj. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can find out the show notes for this episode by heading over to productivemuslimpodcast.com. While you're there, you'll also find out how you can subscribe to this podcast and check out our older episodes which we've released. So we have some interviews with other individuals which are very similar to what you heard right now, and also interviews in which we interview an expert on a topic that will help you become better in a particular area of your life. So do check that out, and do subscribe to our podcast and let your family and friends know about it. So that's all from me. Till next time, remember, be sincere and work hard.